The fog that hung low over the Lancaster countryside had a way of making everything feel paused, as if the world held its breath beneath the weight of dew and silence. It was April 14th, 2002, a Sunday morning, and Esther Lapp stood on her porch. Fingers gripping the weathered wood of the railing, across the fields the outlines of barns and windmills faded into pale gray. There were no sounds except the quiet creak of wood as the boards settled beneath her feet. Every year, on this exact day, Esther stood in the same place and waited. She wasn't sure what for anymore. A sign, a word, a shadow on the horizon, something, anything. It had been 10 years to the day since her son, Aaron, his wife Miriam, and their 5 children had disappeared. She could still picture the kitchen table, the note left behind in Aaron's familiar script, gone for the weekend, visiting family for church matters. Back Monday, don't worry about the animals. Arrange for neighbor boys to help. The note had felt like a breath, brief, unalarming. Just enough to keep panic at bay, but they never returned. Within days, the Lapp home had become a quiet, sunlit shell. The animals were fed, the barn doors stayed shut. The horses still wandered. The paddock, but the house itself, remained untouched, almost respectfully still, as if waiting for the family to step back inside and resume their lives. They never did. And as weeks turned into months, and months into years, the questions stopped being asked aloud. In the Amish world, questions often ran their course quickly, swallowed by the belief that God's will must be accepted even when it remained unreadable. Still, Esther kept asking quietly to herself, and once a year to the gathering. This morning, the living room of Levi Lapp's modest home had been transformed for the annual remembrance service. Levi, Aaron's younger brother, had been hosting the gathering for the past 6 years. Ever since his mother moved in with him following a hip injury, by 8 a.m., a steady stream of black-suited men and women in somber dresses filed into the house. Their shoes were quiet on the floorboards. Their faces wore years of familiar grief. A few of the children looked confused, sensing the weight of the occasion but too young to know its history. Minister Byler spoke of surrender, of accepting loss without understanding. The congregation sang old hymns in Pennsylvania Dutch, the words both beautiful and mournful. After the final prayer, chairs scraped gently against the floor. Hushed conversation resumed. Women headed to the kitchen to set out baked goods and coffee. Men wandered the yard or lingered to talk about weather and work. Only a few remained seated in the living room. Esther, Levi, Samuel, and Rebecca Bear, old Joseph King from the neighboring farm, and Mary Stoltzfus, Miriam's closest friend. At the center of the group sat a wooden table covered in artifacts, photographs, small toys, a quilted bonnet, a set of hymnals. At the heart of the display was the note preserved in a plastic sleeve. The ink had barely faded, and the words still looked freshly penned. 10 years, Mary murmured, tracing a finger over a photograph taken just days before the disappearance. They were so full of life. The photo showed Aaron and Miriam on their porch, Aaron in his broad-brimmed straw hat, Miriam holding baby Daisy, the other children arranged by height, Eli, Michael, Sarah, Ruth, all smiling. Behind them, a line of laundry flapped in the spring wind. I always wondered, Samuel said, staring at the image. They were leaving that morning, weren't they, for the weekend? Yes, Levi said. The note says so. Samuel narrowed his eyes. Then why is their laundry drying? If Miriam knew they'd be gone 3 days, why do the washing? The question landed like a stone in a still pond. Everyone leaned closer to the photograph. There it was. The line of clothes, clearly wet, fluttering in the background, and among them, something fluorescent. That's not Amish, Mary whispered. Levi squinted. What is that? A vest? Joseph King leaned in. Looks like a police vest. Just like that, a decade of stillness cracked open. Officer Breener, Levi said suddenly. He used to help out around the farm. He and Aaron were close. Helped us with fence repairs. Barn raisings. He was different, never pushed us to change. But what would his vest be doing in their laundry? Rebecca asked. Esther's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the photograph. He never asked for it back. I'd remember. Levi stood. I'll check the house. Aaron's farmhouse had stood empty for years, preserved by the family, but untouched by the outside world. Though the doors were locked, Levi had a key. One of only 2 still in circulation. He left quietly, borrowing one of the neighbor boys to drive the buggy while he sat silently and thought. The image of the vest, that single fluorescent blot in an otherwise perfect Amish scene, replayed in his mind like a warning siren. The house greeted him with creaks and the dry scent of time. Dust danced in sunbeams that filtered through faded curtains. Levi moved from room to room slowly. Reverently, he found the vest in a chest in the upstairs bedroom, clean, folded, still bearing the stitched name, P. Breener. Levi held it like something sacred or dangerous. Maybe both. He drove to the New Holland police station, heart thudding, the vest wrapped in cloth on the seat beside him. Officer Breener wasn't in, the young receptionist said. Out on field duty? Levi left no message, no explanation. This wasn't something to be left to voicemail. On his way back, he passed by the Yoder farm and slowed at the sight of a black truck idling near the barn. 2 men in dark uniforms, but not police uniforms, were speaking to Jakob Yoder, who stood with arms folded across his chest. Levi stopped the buggy as he approached. He heard raised voices. This land has been in my family since 1843, Jakob said sharply. You're holding up progress, one of the men snapped. We've made you a generous offer? This is not your place. Leave. Is there a problem? Levi asked. Both men turned, their eyes cold. This is private business, one said. Then take it somewhere else, Levi said. He's asked you to leave. The tension was sharp. Eventually the men backed off, tossing a business card. Onto the dirt as they climbed into their truck. Land Development Associates, no address, no names, just a number. Who are they? Levi asked. Been coming around all week, Jakob said. Pushing me to sell. Talk of development. They won't say what kind. 10 years ago, Levi said slowly, Aaron had people visiting him too, pressuring him to sell. Jakob nodded. I remember. Then they just stopped coming around. The time he disappeared, Levi didn't respond, but a terrible knot began to form in his chest. That night, he laid the vest on his kitchen table. Esther stood beside him, silent eyes on the fabric. What if they didn't leave? Levi said. Finally, what if they were taken? Esther reached for the photograph again. It was in the picture the whole time, and none of us saw it. Until now, Levi said. He looked at the vest, and for the first time in 10 years, he allowed himself to feel something dangerous. Hope that there were still answers out there. Hope that what was hidden might finally be found. It came wrapped in darkness, because truth, no matter how late, still mattered, and the forgotten photograph had just unlocked the first door. The following morning, long before the sun had climbed above the ridgeline, LeVay Lapp parked outside Officer Paul Breener's modest ranch house at the edge of town. The vest, clean and folded, lay in a small satchel beside him on the seat. Levi hadn't slept much. All night, he had replayed the image of the laundry line. The fluorescent fabric fluttering against a backdrop of calm, Amish routine. He stepped out of the buggy and knocked on the door just as the first golden light seeped into the sky. Breener answered in a t-shirt and jeans, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His hair was grayer than Levi remembered, and he looked thinner, maybe older than the 10 years that had passed. Levi, he said with mild surprise, wasn't expecting visitors this early. I won't stay long, Levi said. I found something of yours. Breener's brow furrowed as Levi handed him the folded vest. The officer held it in both hands, slowly unfolding it, the stitched patch P. Breener was unmistakable. Recognition flickered across his face, and for the briefest moment, something else, too discomfort? Where did you find this? Breener asked. In Aaron's house. It's in a cedar chest in the master bedroom. Breener was quiet for a moment. I had forgotten all about it. Do you remember how it got there? The officer looked off toward the horizon, as if gathering the strands of a half-buried memory. It was a morning visit, right before they left. I stopped by to talk to Aaron about some developer concerns. He'd mentioned people had come by offering to buy the farm. Levi's eyes sharpened. Same people who've been talking to Jakob Yoder lately? Could be Briner, said noncommittally. Back then, there was a lot of movement. People sniffing around, trying to get their hands on prime land. But most of the Amish wouldn't budge. What happened that morning? Levi asked, pressing. Briner smiled faintly. Miriam wouldn't let me leave without breakfast. Said I looked tired. I spilled soup or something on my vest. She insisted on washing it. I left without it. Meant to come back, but, well, they were gone by Monday. You never mentioned that, Levi said quietly. Briner gave a slight shrug. I didn't think it mattered. Levi studied the man's face. There were lines, they're deeper than age alone could carve. Guilt? Fear? Or just exhaustion? Briner folded the vest again and looked at Levi. You think this means something? I think Levi said someone needs to start asking questions. Again, Briner's expression tightened. Careful, Levi. There's old ground here. Most people have made peace with it. Peace isn't the same as truth, Levi replied. He turned and walked away, leaving the officer standing in the doorway, back at the Lapp homestead. Esther was already at work in the kitchen, kneading dough. With slow, methodical movements. She didn't look up when Levi entered. You saw him? She asked. Levi nodded. Said Miriam washed it after he spilled soup. Esther said nothing for a moment, her hands folding the dough over itself with quiet precision. I don't believe that man would spill anything on accident. Levi leaned against the doorway. You never trusted him. I trusted the way Aaron trusted him, Esther said. But even then, something about his eyes too, knowing, to watchful. Levi considered her words. What do you remember about the days before the family left? Esther paused. They were tense. Aaron was distracted. Aaron asked to borrow. More jars than usual for canning, said she wanted to store things for a trip, but she never said where they were going. What about their land? Was he planning to sell? No. He was angry. Said people were pressuring him. Said he was tired of hiding his irritation behind politeness. Levi crossed the room and pulled out the photograph again. What if the trip wasn't voluntary? Esther looked at him for a long time. Then the note was a lie. That afternoon, Levi drove to the county assessor's office in town. It was the kind of government building that smelled like old paper and floor wax. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Tracy, didn't blink when he asked for property transaction records for the years around. 1,992. He focused on parcels around Aaron's farm and the Lapp family's holdings. Most of the land remained in Amish hands, passed down through generations. But a few names stood out. Davidson Holdings, Levi murmured, scanning one of the older records. Never heard of them. That one's strange, Tracy said. Leaning over, big developer from the early 90s. Bought up a few pieces but then just disappeared, like they gave up. No activity after 1993. The company dissolved, far as I know. Did they buy from the Amish? Some tried. Not. Many succeeded. I remember a few cases where the deals almost happened but fell apart. Did one of those almosts involve Aaron Lapp? Tracy frowned and began tapping through the microfiche. After a moment, she stopped. Look at this. It was a proposed purchase agreement, never finalized. A document showing an offer. For Aaron's land, made in March 1992, 1 month before his family vanished. They made an offer, Tracy said, but Aaron never signed. Levi stared at the file. In the margins, someone had scribbled a note. Family hesitant. Require alternate pressure. Levi left the office with copies of the documents tucked into a brown envelope. As he stepped into the sunlight, he noticed a black truck parked across the street, the same model he'd seen at the Yoder farm. A man sat behind the wheel. Sunglasses. No identifying marks on the vehicle. No company logos. Just a quiet presence. Watching Levi got into his buggy and rode away, heart-pounding that night. After Esther had gone to bed, Levi sat in the living room sorting through the old photo box. Most of the images were well known to him. Family gatherings, barn raisings, weddings, births. Flipped through them slowly, mechanically. Then he found it. A second copy of the porch photo. This one was clearer and original, not a photocopy. And in this version, there was something different. A face. Behind the porch railing, partly obscured by the edge of the frame, stood a man. Not Aaron. Not anyone from the family. Broad, dash-shouldered, clean-shaven, wearing a collared shirt and slacks. English and... Looking directly into the camera, Levi turned the photo over. On the back, in faint pencil, taken by Officer Breener, April 10, 1992, Levi stared at the handwriting. Then back at the man in the background, whoever he was. It hadn't been in the copy they'd passed around at the remembrance service. That version had been cropped deliberately, and Levi suddenly realized. Someone had gone out of their way to remove this man from the photo. But why? And more importantly, who was he? The next morning, Levi brought the photograph to Mary Stoltzfus. Her hands trembled as she studied it. "This man," she whispered. "He came to the farm the day before they left. I saw him. He was arguing with Aaron. About what? I don't know. But Aaron was angry. More angry than I'd ever seen." "Him, why didn't you say anything?" "We didn't talk to outsiders. We didn't talk about our own troubles. And when they vanished, I thought maybe I imagined it." "You didn't." Mary looked at the photo again. "He's not Amish, no," Levi said. But he was there, and Breener took the photo. Mary's expression shifted from fear to something colder. Then Officer Breener lied. That evening, Levi drove to Jakob Yoder's farm again. The sun was setting over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the tilled rows. "They came back yesterday," Jakob said. "Same men, same truck. They said time was running out. That if I didn't sell, I'd regret it." Him, the photo. "Do you recognize this man?" Jakob studied it. His eyes narrowed. He was with them, not the one who talks most, but always watching. Silent. Levi's voice was grim. "I think this goes deeper than just land sales. I think they've been trying to erase us for a long time." Jakob's jaw tightened. "Then they made a mistake by letting you remember."
I'll wait.
Night, Levi sat at the kitchen table, the original photo laid beside the cropped version. He now had a police vest washed the morning of the disappearance, a failed land deal with veiled threats in the margins, a photo altered to erase the presence of an unknown man, a known connection between that man and a dissolved developer, and pressure beginning again, a decade later, by men who had no faces, no names, and no patience. Something had happened 10 years ago, and someone had tried very hard to make sure it stayed buried. But they hadn't counted on one thing. The road to the old farmhouse wound like a thread through wheat fields that rippled in the wind like golden water. Who hadn't stopped watching. Levi Lapp drove slowly. Truth was clawing its way to the surface. The photo he'd found the one showing the man who wasn't going to stay buried. Be there sat on the seat beside him, along with the uncropped version and the original marked by Officer Breener's faint pencil scrawl. He hadn't told Esther where he was going, not because he meant to deceive her, but because he didn't want to bring her hope until he had something concrete to offer. At her age, hope was a fragile thing. So was heartbreak. The air inside the abandoned Lapp farmhouse was stale with age. Levi unlocked the front door and stepped in, immediately swallowed by the dusty quiet. Faint outlines on the wallpaper showed where photographs once hung. The dining room still had the long table, though the chairs were stacked in the corner, legs pointed upward like skeletal limbs. He made his way to the master bedroom, the cedar. Chest was still there. He opened it again, more carefully this time. Beneath the vest were other items, things he hadn't noticed before in his haste. A yellowed church bulletin, a set of sermon notes in Aaron's neat script, a folded letter with no envelope. He unfolded the letter slowly. "Aaron, they won't wait much longer. You either sell or suffer the consequences. You think your land is safe because your people live quietly. But this isn't about you anymore. It's bigger than your fields and barns. I tried to keep them off your back, but my influence only goes so far." Last offer. P.B. Levy stared at the initials at the BOTTOMPB, Paul Breener. Later that evening, Levi drove into town again. This time he parked across the street from the police station and waited until dusk. He had no plan, only instinct. He watched as Officer Breener exited the building around 7:15, talking casually with another officer, then getting into his cruiser. Levi followed at a distance. Breener drove north, through the edge of town, then west out toward the foothills. Levi's heart pounded. This wasn't a patrol route. This wasn't a visit to check on an elderly member of the community or to respond. To a call, he followed until Breener's taillights disappeared up a dirt road that wound into a dense patch of woods. Levi pulled over and killed his lights. He waited 5 minutes, then got out and followed on foot. The road led to a clearing. A building sat at the center, partially completed. Modern, steel-framed, but styled to look like an old meeting house. A sign on the construction fencing read, Amish. Heritage Memorial opening soon. Levi crouched behind a tree, breath caught in his throat. Breener stood near a set of floodlights, talking to 2 men in dark clothing. One of them looked painfully familiar, the man from the photograph. Even at this distance, Levi could see the hard edge of his jaw, the way he stood slightly apart from the others. As if used to commanding from the background, Levi crept closer. He crouched behind a stack of construction supplies just as one of the men unlocked a large storage container beside the building. The lid came open with a heavy groan, and what Levi saw inside turned his stomach. Bones, dozens of them, some tagged in evidence bags, others loosely wrapped in canvas, human remains. Carefully stored hidden, Breener leaned over and pulled something from the container. A child's shoe, I told. You two get rid of this one, the man from the photograph snapped. Sentimental fool, the other muttered. I meant to, Breener said. I forgot it was still in the bin. The man gave him a cold look. We can't afford oversights. Not this time. Once the memorial opens, this land becomes sacred, untouchable. We can't have souvenirs from the last time popping up. Understand? Breener nodded silently. Levi backed away slowly, heart hammering so hard he thought it might betray him, turned and slipped into the woods, barely daring to breathe. He didn't stop shaking until he was halfway home. The next morning, Levi made his way to the bishop's house. Bishop Amos Glick was a large, quiet man whose words came slowly and whose silences came even slower. He poured tea as Levi relayed everything: the vest, the photo, the letter, the construction site. When Levi showed him the letter signed by PB, Amos's eyes darkened. I always feared Aaron had angered someone, Amos said quietly. But I never imagined. Levi leaned forward. We need to go to the state police. Not local. Breener's compromised. Amos said nothing for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. We'll do it together. They sat in a quiet interview room inside the Lancaster State Police headquarters. Detective Sarah Chen, a composed woman with sharp eyes, listened intently as Levi laid everything out. She never interrupted when he finished. She folded her hands. You understand what you're suggesting, Mr. Lapp, that a decorated officer has knowingly participated in the cover-up of multiple homicides, possibly more. I understand, Levi said. Can you take me to the site? Levi nodded. She stood. Let's go. The drive back to the site was quiet. Levi sat beside her in the unmarked car, watching the landscape blur past. When they arrived, there was no one there. The fence was still up, the signs still hanging, the containers locked. But Levi led her to the exact place he had seen the men gather. They were here, he said. The remains were inside that bin. Detective Chen called in a forensics team. Within an hour, the containers were open, the evidence removed, the entire site taped off. That evening, Breener was taken into custody. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. But when they showed him the child's shoe and the letter, something inside him cracked. According to the official report, he asked for a lawyer. According to the unofficial one, he wept. Levi stood beside Amos outside the station later that night. It was past midnight, and the air had turned cold. Why would someone build a memorial on the very site where they hid the bones? Levi asked. To sanctify the crime, Amos said. If it's called a holy place, no one digs. No one questions. No one remembers the truth. Just a story told the way they want it. The truth came out anyway. Because someone kept. Looking? They stood in silence. Then Amos said quietly, "What about the man in the photo?" Levi turned to him. "I'm going to find out who he is." Amos nodded once. Then Levi went home, heart heavy, but awake in a way it hadn't been in years, because the story wasn't finished, and the man in the photo hadn't vanished. Not yet. The morning after Breener's arrest, Levi Lapp walked the familiar gravel path to the edge of the old oak grove behind his brother's former farm. The air was thick with fog, and the trees stood like silent sentinels in the shifting mist. State police had sealed off the construction site, and forensics teams were combing through every inch of disturbed ground. Still, Levi couldn't rest, not with one face still unaccounted for. The man in the photograph. The outsider, the one no one could name, and the one who had stood silently in Aaron's last known photograph, just behind the family, like a shadow waiting to be noticed. Levi had brought a copy of the photo with him, folded carefully in his coat pocket. He stared at it now, leaning against one of the larger oaks, searching the man's expression for something, anything. The jawline, the posture, the way his eyes were cast not toward the camera, but slightly to the side, as if already watching something else. Not a developer, Levi thought. Something colder, more deliberate. He returned to the car parked down the road and drove back toward town. He had one more stop to make before he spoke to Detective Chen again. The New Holland Historical Society was run out of a restored farmhouse near the library. The interior was cluttered with maps, portraits, and glass cases filled with dusty tools and heirlooms. An elderly volunteer named Helen greeted him at the door. "I'm looking for old county photos," Levi said. "Land company staff, developers, county board meetings. Anything from 1990 to 1993? Helen blinked. "That's specific." Levi smiled. "I'm patient." She directed him to the basement archive. 3 hours later, hunched over a magnifier, Levi froze. A photo from a 1991 County Planning Commission meeting. Seated at the edge of the group, the same man from the photo, the caption beneath listed 5 names. Levi's eyes scanned until they stopped on the 5th. Thomas Davidson, Land Development Associates. Davidson, the name matched the business card. Dropped at Jakob Yoder's feet. Levi's pulse quickened. Thomas Davidson hadn't just been in town. He'd been working behind the scenes, embedding himself in the county's development machinery. But the trail had gone cold, till now. He took the photo to Detective Chen that afternoon. "This is him," he said, laying it on her desk. "Thomas Davidson. He's the one in the photo behind my brother's family." Chen examined the image carefully. "Davidson. I've heard that name." She opened her laptop, typing quickly. He headed Land Development Associates. The company was dissolved. In 1994, just after your family disappeared, no tax filings after that. But Davidson didn't vanish. He restructured under a new LLC 3 years later. She turned the screen toward Levy. Heritage Vision Group. Inc. The website was modern, sterile, full of buzzwords about community enhancement and rural preservation. A smiling portrait stared back from the About page. Founder and CEO, Thomas Davidson, the same man, same jawline, same dead eyes. Chen leaned back in her chair. He reinvented himself. Pivoted to historical tourism. Grant money, federal funds, got cozy with lawmakers. Now he builds cultural sites, faux historical villages, Amish-themed experiences. Levi felt sick. They buried my family on land they planned to profit from. Chen nodded grimly, and dressed it up as a tribute. She picked up her phone. "I'm escalating this to the state prosecutor's office. We're going after him next." That night, Levi visited Esther's small home on the family property. She sat near the fire, a quilt draped across her lap, hands folded, waiting. "You found him, didn't you?" she asked, before Levi even spoke. He sat beside her, quiet for a long moment. "His name is Thomas Davidson. He was in charge of the land deal Aaron refused. He was there the day before they disappeared. He's the one who kept pushing." "Did Breener name him?" Levi shook his head. "Not yet. But we don't need Breener. We have the photo, the county records." Enough to start. Esther reached for the Warren family photo that now sat permanently on her mantel. I used to imagine they had just left. They were in another community, that they'd changed their names, raised the children quietly somewhere. Levi didn't interrupt. The fantasy had long passed, but he let her speak it aloud once. More. They never left, Mama, he said gently. They were taken. And the man who did it, he's still walking around, smiling in brochures. Esther's voice was low. Then you bring him down, Levi. You bring him down with every truth we've got. Over the next week, the investigation widened. The forensic team confirmed the remains found at the site included all 7 members of Aaron's family: Aaron, Miriam, and their 5 children, Lai, Michael, Sarah, Ruth, and little Daisy. Levi was allowed to view some of the recovered items: a thimble with Miriam's initials, a cornhusk doll made by Sarah, a worn hymn book, fragments of hand-stitched clothing. Each piece was a blow to the chest, but each was also a piece of proof. Davidson, meanwhile, had disappeared. His office had been vacated within 48 hours of Breener's arrest. His receptionist gone. Files shredded. Computers wiped. The development company's phone number disconnected. He knew the net was closing. Detective Chen showed Levi an email thread the state prosecutor's office had uncovered from an anonymous tip line. It had been submitted the day Breener was arrested. A single sentence: "You won't find Davidson unless you look where his legacy lives." What does it mean? Levi asked. Chen clicked on another file map showing all Heritage Vision projects in Pennsylvania. One stood out. A rural site north of Harrisburg is newly opened, the Willowbrook Historical Experience, a living museum depicting 19th century Amish life. It's remote, Chen said. Privately funded. Quiet. We're sending a team tomorrow. Going too, Levi said. Chen didn't argue the next morning. Under cover of darkness, Levi rode with the state police task force up winding mountain roads. The van creaked with equipment and radios whispered static as they pulled off the highway. The Willowbrook sign emerged out of the fog, hand-painted, stylized to look antique. Come step into the past. They passed through an open gate. Property was spread out over several acres, replica buildings, a barn, horses tethered in a pen, even actors dressed in bonnets and suspenders, preparing for the day's tours. Chen signaled the team to move in. The element of surprise was complete. Davidson was found inside the main office building, seated behind a massive desk, drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. When the agents entered, weapons drawn, he didn't move. "You've been busy," said Detective Chen, cuffed him herself. "You buried a family and called it a memorial." Davidson shrugged. "People forget. They always do. You give them a story, a plaque, a guided tour. Nobody ever digs." "Well," she said, tightening the cuffs, "we did." As Davidson was escorted past Levi, their eyes met for the first time. There was no fear in the man's expression, just calculation, cold detachment. "You could have sold Levi," Davidson said, almost conversational. "All of this was avoidable." Levi didn't reply, but later, he would remember that line and understand just how wrong Davidson had been. Because the story was far from over, and now, every piece of evidence falling into place, the full truth was finally within reach. The courtroom was packed, not with spectators or reporters, no. The judge had ordered a closed proceeding due to the sensitive nature of the case. But law enforcement, legal aides, and forensic analysts filled the benches, along with one member of the Lapp family who had earned his place in the front row, Levi. He sat straight-backed in his simple black coat, hands folded in his lap. The courtroom lighting was too bright, too sterile, too cold, but his gaze never wavered from the man at the defense table. Thomas Davidson, the monster in thee, photographed the man who had smiled in glossy brochures, posing as a champion of rural heritage, while bones lay buried beneath his memorials. Davidson sat calm. Dressed in a dark suit with a red tie, eyes forward. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. His attorney, a lean man with a predatory air, leaned in occasionally to whisper, but Davidson said nothing. Detective Sarah Chen took the stand first. Her testimony was methodical, fact-driven. She walked the court through the discovery of the remains at the New Holland site, the matching DNA, the hidden storage container, the fraudulent corporate records, the use of federal preservation grants tied to properties developed by Heritage Vision Group. She explained how a corrupted local officer, Paul Breener, had served as the internal enabler, how Breener's quiet cooperation after arrest confirmed Davidson's role as the orchestrator. Davidson knew, she said. He didn't just benefit from the silence. He manufactured it. When Breener took the stand the next day, the room grew even colder. He was pale, sweating, 10 years older than he'd been only 3 weeks ago. I didn't want it to go that far, he whispered. I was trying to scare Aaron into selling. That's all, pressure him. Maybe ruin his crops, drive down the price. But Davidson, he said it wasn't enough. He said Aaron had become a symbol. Other families would follow if he resisted. Breener's voice cracked. He gave me money to keep quiet after the family disappeared. Told me to handle the investigation, keep it short, vague. He had the right connections. The station captain didn't ask questions. Not after I said the family left voluntarily. Levi closed his eyes. That lie, that single sentence, had echoed through their community for a decade. After Breener, the court heard from the forensics team, from the county clerk who verified altered land records, from an FBI analyst who traced shell companies used to launder development funds. Each witness tightened the noose around Davidson's neck, and then, on the 5th day of testimony, it was Levi's turn. He stepped into the witness box and felt every eye in the room settle on him. He wore his black hat. His boots were polished. His hands, rough from years of woodworking, rested gently on the railing. Tell us who your brother was, the prosecutor said, and Levi did. He spoke of Aaron's quiet determination, his love for the land, the way he laughed when baby Daisy gurgled at him, practice. He spoke of Miriam's embroidery, her thimbles lined up neatly in a row. Her habit of baking 3 loaves instead of 2, always meant for someone in need. He spoke of the children Eli, always chasing frogs. Michael, who played hymns on the dulcimer. Sarah, who'd once tried to nurse a wounded bird back to life. Ruth, who'd just learned to milk a cow without spilling a drop. Daisy, too small to remember but never forgotten. They were good. Levi said simply, they weren't perfect, but they were ours. And you stole them from us. The room was silent. Even Davidson looked away. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind stirred the fallen leaves. Levi stood on the steps beside Detective Chen and Bishop Amos Glick, who had flown in from Lancaster for the verdict. The judge had denied Davidson bail. Trial would follow in full. But the federal racketeering and conspiracy charges ensured he wouldn't walk free again. We found more remains, Chen said quietly. In a field outside Bedford. Same method. Yes. Same canvas wrappings. We're still identifying them, other families, Amos asked. Chen nodded. We think so. And not all Amish. Some English whistleblowers. A journalist who went missing in 1996. A local historian. The pattern matches. Levi said nothing. The truth was widening, deepening. This wasn't just about Aaron anymore. This was an empire of silence, built on carefully buried foundations back in New Holland. The memorial service was different that year. Instead of 7 empty chairs for the Lapp family, there were 7 wooden caskets. Levi had built them himself. Each one was simple, sturdy, lovingly shaped from oak and walnut. Miriam's had a small flower carved into the lid. Children's were lined with soft quilts. Aaron's had no embellishment, just his initials burned into the wood. The cemetery sat behind the meeting house, in a quiet grove of trees where birds gathered in the early light as the buggies filed in, and the community gathered in respectful silence. Levi stepped to the front. They were taken from us, he said, but not forgotten. And now, at last, they come home. The bishop spoke a few words. A hymn was sung, and one by one, the caskets were lowered into the earth. Esther Lapp, now frail, but still sharp-eyed, stepped forward. She pressed her palm against Miriam's casket, then Aaron's. They'll rest here, she said, among their people, not beneath concrete, not beneath a lie. Levi stood beside her, silent tears tracking down his face. The wind stirred again, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt the weight begin to lift. That evening, Levi returned to the farmhouse one last time. The for sale sign had been taken down, the property no longer haunted, only watched over. He walked to the back porch. The clothesline was still there. He reached up, removed the rusted clips, and folded the line gently in his hand. Then he walked to the field and buried it beneath the oak tree. Aaron had planted the year before he disappeared. It was time. The ghosts didn't speak, but they were listening, and finally, they'd been heard. The frost came early that year, by the 3rd week of October. The fields around New Holland were silver with morning ice. The last of the pumpkins sat hollow-eyed in the furrows, waiting to be brought in before the soil hardened. Levi Lapp walked the perimeter of his brother's old land, coat pulled tight against the cold. It had been 3 weeks since the memorial service. 3 weeks since the quiet burial of a family that had vanished 10 years earlier. But the silence hadn't lasted long. The FBI had expanded the investigation. Davidson had been their opening. Crackbutt, now that the door was open. Everything behind it was beginning to pour out. Detective Sarah Chen called Levi 2 days after the burial. "We found an old communications cache," she said. "Hidden in the foundation of a barn on a property Davidson once purchased under a shell name. There are letters, memos, internal documents, some signed by Breener, some by Davidson, but there's one more name that keeps coming up. And Levi. It's someone you know." Levi stood in his workshop, hands still dusty from sanding the frame of a cradle he'd been building for a neighbor. "Who?" he asked. "Samuel Bear." Levi's breath caught. Samuel, his cousin, his best friend growing up. It's the man who had helped him host the remembrance services for years. The man who had wept when they buried Aaron and Miriam. "No," Levi said. "Not possible he was involved," Chen said. "We found correspondence between him and Davidson. Payments, updates. He wasn't just a bystander. Was there go between someone inside the community who kept them informed, who vouched for buyers, smoothed things over." Levi staggered back from the workbench. The cradle tipped over. He didn't even notice the next day. Levi sat in silence across from Samuel in the Bear family's main room. The fire crackled. The smell of boiling onions wafted from the kitchen. Where Rebecca prepared soup, she didn't know. Levi could tell by the way she greeted him with warmth, offered coffee without suspicion. If she had known, she would have looked away. Samuel's beard was streaked with gray now. His once quick eyes looked older, slower. "I need to ask you something," Levi said. Samuel nodded, as if already bracing himself. "Were you working with Davidson?" Samuel said nothing. He looked into the fire. Then, after a long minute, "I didn't know what they planned. Not at first. Not the full extent, I thought. I thought it would be like the others. The others." Levi's voice was hoarse. "You mean there were more?" Samuel closed his eyes. "Davidson came to me in 1991, said he was building something, a future, said our land could either be remembered or erased. I was afraid, Levi. You remember the floods that year? The crop failures? The boys leaving the Ordnung, going English? Davidson promised stability, said if we helped him develop certain parcels, the rest of our way of life could be protected." Levi's fists clenched. "You sold them a lie." "Didn't know they'd kill Aaron," Samuel said quickly. "They said they'd apply pressure, yes, but not murder, not the children. When it happened, I was told it was an accident, a conflict gone too far. Davidson said it would never happen again, that we could keep things quiet and preserve the rest of the community. You stood next to me every year," Levi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You stood in my home and prayed for them." Tears welled in Samuel's eyes. "I buried it. I told myself silence was the only way to protect the others." "You don't know what they threatened to do next, Levi? Entire districts, whole settlements. You were their mouth," Levi said coldly. "And now, I'll make sure they hear you scream." He stood and walked out without another word. He drove straight to the police station. An hour later, federal agents arrived. At Samuel's door, by November. The investigation had grown into something larger than New Holland. The Department of Justice issued a statement, confirming that more than a dozen families across Pennsylvania and Ohio were believed to have been targeted by what was now being called the Willowbrook Conspiracy. Heritage Vision Group and its predecessor, Land Development Associates, had been used as fronts for a coordinated effort to obtain land through coercion, fraud and, in at least 3 cases, murder. The names of victims began appearing in the press. A Mennonite family near Lidditz, listed as missing since 1988. A Quaker couple from Ohio, presumed drowned in 1991. A journalist from Reading, gone since 1996, now believed to have uncovered too much in each case. A developer had purchased the land shortly after the disappearance. In each case, the structures had been torn down within a year. In each case, a heritage site had later been proposed. All the stories, Levi thought. Rewritten, polished, sanitized until now. Levi received a letter in December, not by email or formal delivery but by hand. He found it tucked beneath a bundled stack of kindling near his woodshop. Inside was a single page. Asterisk, you've unearthed bones that were meant to stay buried. You think the land has surrendered its secrets, but the mountain has more. Look behind the old fire road. There's one last place they never paved over. You'll know it when you see it. If you want the rest of the truth, go alone. Before the snow comes. A friend asterisk Levi reread the note 3 times. The handwriting was blocky, masculine. It wasn't Davidson's, and it certainly wasn't Breener's. He drove up to the ridge that afternoon. The air was bitter. Wind rattled the bare trees. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the promise of it hung in the air like a threat. He followed the fire road until it split. A narrow trail veered left and marked, almost swallowed by scrub and fallen leaves. He took it on foot. After 30 minutes, the path dipped into a hollow, and there it was. A cabin. Stone foundation, weathered timbers. No smoke, no footprints. But it was real. Levi approached cautiously, each step louder in the silence. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, dust, dry rot, and stillness, but also ... torn maps, blueprints, old newspaper clippings, pinned to the wall with rusted nails. He moved toward the table. Stacks of notebooks lay scattered, marked with dates ranging from 1986 to 2003. He opened one. Inside was a list of names: Aaron Lapp, Miriam Lapp, Eli, Michael, Sarah, Ruth, Daisy. Beside each name, a symbol, checkmark. Below that, another set. Daniel Schultz, Mennonite, Hannah and Philip Reed, Quakers. Ellis Green, journalist, and one more name that stopped Levi cold. Esther Lapped, his mother. Beside her name, a dash, a question mark. He stumbled back from the table. This was a kill list, but who had made it? The pages weren't Davidson's handwriting, or Breener's. No, this was someone else. Someone deeper. Someone still watching, still choosing. And Esther, by some twist of fate or mercy, had been spared, but not removed, not erased, just postponed. Levi left the cabin shaking. The notebooks tucked in his coat. The full truth wasn't behind them. It wasn't even in Davidson's courtroom. The truth was still unfolding, and someone wanted him to know they were not done. The snow came 3 days later, swift and heavy, covering the countryside like a burial shroud. By dawn, the roads were dusted in white, fields silent, the trees etched in ice. Levi's Lap stood at the kitchen window, holding the notebook he'd retrieved from the mountain cabin. It lay open on the table behind him, pages heavy with dread. The kill list, the names, strange symbols, the check marks beside each confirmed victim. And the dash beside Esther's name? Still alive? Still marked? Who had written it? He turned back to the table and re-examined the final pages of the notebook. Unlike the earlier entries scrawled in hurried cursive or clipped shorthand, the final entries were more detailed. Dated 2003, a decade ago, they read like internal memos or reports, as if the writer had begun to formalize his thoughts. Asterisk objective: consolidate rural resistance sectors under a unified narrative. Where cooperation is impossible, neutralize. Lapp family remains the primary cautionary tale. Removal effective. Community destabilized briefly, then receded. Residual memory is manageable. Esther Lapp remains unconverted. Observe. Asterisk unconverted. Levi had never seen that word used like that before, not in an Amish context. It wasn't spiritual. It was corporate, cold, strategic. He took a deep breath and carefully turned the next page. There. Scrawled hastily was a single name at the bottom, underlined twice. MG. That was it. No surname, no initials. Just MG. Whoever had written the journals had signed them with that cryptic marking. Over and over, not Davidson, not Breener, someone deeper, someone. It's untouched. Someone still watching. Levi returned to the cabin. That afternoon, against the warnings of Detective Chen, against the wishes of his mother, against the instincts screaming at him to stay away. But the pages in the notebook were not just old history. They were recent. The last entry had been added no more than a year ago. This was an active site. He needed to know if someone would return. He parked farther down the trail, this time and hiked through deeper snow. The trees groaned in the wind. His boots crunched. Over crusted ice, a single trail of tire tracks led away from the cabin fresh, but partially snowed over. Someone had been there before the storm. The door creaked as he entered. Everything looked the same. Maps on the wall, newspaper clippings, surveillance photos, some of them recent images of Amish homes, market stalls, schoolhouses, and one photo. Pinned at the center of the wall, Levi himself, in his buggy. Outside the courthouse, at the memorial service, the edges of the photo were marked with red ink. Underneath, Lapp brother, uncooperative, increasing visibility. Monitor. Stared at the photo, the ink bleeding into the paper like an infection. His heart pounded. They were watching him still. That night, Levi brought the journal to Detective Chen's motel room. She had remained in New Holland, working quietly, trying to shield the investigation from premature media exposure. The DOJ had given them limited time before the press caught wind of the broader conspiracy. Chen flipped through the journal slowly, her expression tightening with each page. Whoever wrote this wasn't just part of the operation, she said. They were running it. And they're still out there, Levi said. Davidson took orders. Breener was a pawn. Swenyemji is the architect. Chen nodded. I've seen this kind of notation before. Conversion is often used in black ops, language flipping informants, recruitment. But in this context, she tapped a paragraph. It sounds more like domestication. It's like they were trying to condition certain families. Make examples of others? A cult? No, worse, she said. A strategy. She closed the book. Davidson's trial starts in 8 weeks. But now that we have this, we can't wait that long. We need to find MG. The name surfaced unexpectedly 3 days later. An analyst from the DOJ called Chen with a lead. We found a record, the analyst said. Buried in some old grant applications from the early 90s. All these land development grants went through a review board. But most of the members were anonymous. We finally cracked the encryption on one batch. Guess who the grant coordinator was for all Davidson's projects? Who? Michael Greaves. Initials MG. Chen's stomach turned. Where is he now? Off the grid. Last known address was in upstate New York. But here's the twist. He's never been officially connected to any company. No public role, no photos, no driver's license since 1997. It's like he vanished. Or made himself invisible, Chen called. Levi immediately. He has a name now, she said. Michael Greaves. Levi repeated it aloud, letting the weight of it settle. Then he whispered, I think I know where to look. The place Levi had in mind wasn't on any map. It had been passed down by word of mouth, part of old stories told in the fields, between fence post repairs and buggy rides. A hunting lodge built into the side of a ridge owned by a man no one ever saw, but who always paid in cash. Amish didn't go near it, not because of fear, but because of tradition. It was one of those quiet exclusions in their world. That place is not for us. Levi had only been there once, when he was a boy, lost in the woods for a night before his father found him. He remembered the glint of a window in the trees, a chimney without smoke. Now, It might be the last link to the man who had orchestrated his family's death. He drove there under cover of dark, bringing only a flashlight, the journal, and a voice recorder. The trail was barely visible beneath. The snow, no tire tracks, but faint footprints barely a day old, led up the path. He followed. The lodge loomed like a shadowed tomb, wood siding, stone base. A second-floor window shuttered from within. No lights, no signs of life. He knocked once. No answer. He pushed the door gently. It creaked open. Inside, dust, stale air, and an unmistakable hum faint. Mechanical, a generator, somewhere below. He stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind him. The basement stairs descended into darkness. Levi flicked on his flashlight. The walls were lined with boxers, labeled folders, dusty reels of microfilm, stacks of maps, floor plans, Amish community layouts marked in red, and then the far wall another. Photo of Aaron and Miriam, but this one was different. It had been annotated. Circles around each face. Aaron, resistant. Miriam, soft target. Eli, watchful. Sarah, quiet, compliant. Ruth, quiet, compliant. Michael, resistant. Daisy, N.A. Levi's hands shook. Footsteps echoed above. He looked up. Light catching on a polished surface, a camera. He was being watched. And whoever had built this place, they knew he had come. The floorboards creaked above. Levi's breath stilled in his chest. He switched off his flashlight, crouching low behind a stack of crates. His heart thudded so hard he feared it would echo through the concrete walls. The temperature in the basement dropped, or maybe it was just the blood draining from his limbs. The footsteps continued slow, unhurried, calculated. Whoever was up there knew the house. They weren't stumbling. They were circling. Hunting, he risked. A glance upward just in. Time to see a narrow shaft of light widen across the floor as the basement door creaked open. A silhouette stood at the top of the stairs, tall, angular. A flashlight flicked on, its beam sweeping across the ceiling. Levi pressed deeper into the shadows. The figure descended, one slow step at a time. "Mr. Lapp," the voice called. .com. Flat, stripped of emotion. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me." Levi didn't respond. The beam swept closer. "I expected it to be Breener," the voice continued. "Then Davidson. But no, you're more persistent than I gave you credit for." The figure reached the floor, stepping into view. Levi finally saw his face, gaunt, intelligent, lined like paper, folded too many times. "I'm Michael Greaves," he said. He wore a black turtleneck, a dark wool coat, no visible weapon. But Levi didn't need to see one. Men like Greaves didn't bluff. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. "I assume," Greaves continued, "you've been through my files, my journals, my studies. You've seen the work." Work. Levi's voice was hoarse, raw with disbelief. "You murdered families. You buried children under fake schools and tourist traps." "I stabilized communities," Greaves replied. "What you call murder, I call course correction." Levi stepped. From behind the crates, fists clenched. "You picked us off like pests." "You were a variable," Greaves said, his voice flat. "A resistant cell. We needed compliance in that corridor. One family says no, the next 30 start to question everything. It's contagious. Belief, Mr. Lapp, belief is always contagious." "Killed my brother, my nieces, my nephews." "Rerouted entropy," Greaves said, taking a step forward. "I built something beautiful." "You built a lie," Levi growled. They stood just feet apart now, separated by a line of archival boxes and a decade of devastation. Greaves tilted his head slightly. "You know why I didn't erase you too? Cowardice, curiosity," he said. "You weren't supposed to matter. You were the quiet one. The younger brother, the craftsman. But you wouldn't let it go. You kept digging. Because I still loved them," Levi said. "Because truth still means something." Greaves looked mildly amused. "You think truth wins?" "He doesn't. People choose comfort over truth every time. You bury bones under a plaque, Build a gift shop on the ashes, and within 5 years they're selling postcards. That's the real power. It's not bullets, not bribes. Narrative. And why are you hiding? Levi asked. The question landed hard. For the first time, Greaves hesitated. You're outnumbered, Levi added. You're out of time. I'm not the only one who found this place. Greaves's eyes flicked toward the stairwell, and that's when the floor above shattered with the sound of a battering ram. Police boots thundered across the floor. FBI. Hands in the air, Greaves didn't flinch. Simply turned to Levi and said, Do you think they're ready to hear it all? Levi said nothing. Greaves raised his hand slowly as the first agents descended the stairs, rifles leveled, but he smiled. Even as they cuffed him, he smiled. The raid uncovered a staggering trove of materials. 30-3 coded journals. Maps detailing expansion plans stretching into Ohio, Indiana, and even southern Ontario. Photographs, surveillance logs. Interview transcripts with community members who had disappeared. Names of officials who had accepted bribes. Schematics of cultural monuments designed to sanitize and overwrite.
How real.
Histories and, worst of all, videotapes. Footage of coercion, recordings. Of families being confronted, threatened, re-educated. Some went silent, some vanished. One of the tapes showed Aaron Lapp. Levi watched it in a sealed DOJ room, flanked by agents and analysts. Aaron sat at a wooden table, hands clasped, posture. Ridge Davidson stood off camera. Greaves's voice was audible from behind the lens. You're in the way. Your neighbors are ready to move forward. You're holding them back. Aaron didn't respond. You think silence will protect you? It won't. You'll just disappear quietly, and no one will remember why. Aaron finally spoke. God remembers. That was it. The tape cut off. But that sentence, God remembers, was carved into Levi's mind. In the weeks that followed, indictments were handed down like storm clouds. Davidson was hit with 21 federal charges. Breener turned state's witness and entered protective custody. And Michael Greaves? The DOJ labeled him an architect of rural neutralization, a term never before used in public court. The media latched onto the case. Headlines screamed conspiracy. Documentaries began development within a month. Panels were formed. Victim families identified. Historical records corrected. But Levi didn't want any of that. He stayed out of the spotlight. He rebuilt Aaron's house quietly with his own hands. Room by room, he kept the porch just the way it was in the photo, and when the snow melted in April, he restrung the clothesline, not to hang laundry, but to remind himself of what had once fluttered there. A warning no one had seen. Now seen, now understood, now answered. Spring arrived in New Holland not as a celebration, but as a soft unfolding mud replacing snow. Thawed fields stretching beneath the pale sun, and the first cautious buds appearing on the orchard trees. Life returned slowly, unsure whether it was safe. Levi Lapp sat beneath the large oak tree near the back of the property, in his favorite thinking spot. The notebook from the cabin lay closed in his lap. The last page, the one where Esther Lapp was listed with a dash, haunted him. More than any bone, any taped conversation, any courtroom confession, Esther had not been an accident. She had been spared. But why, and by whom? We'd asked her once, gently, if she'd ever received any unusual letters after the family vanished. She had looked away and said, no. But the next day, 8, he'd found her at the kitchen table, staring at an old envelope with no return address, postmarked 2 weeks after the disappearance. She didn't speak about it, but she didn't hide it either. Inside was a single photograph, her family at a church picnic, taken months before the disappearance. On the back, a handwritten note. You were not chosen. Do not step forward. She burned it in the fireplace that night, and said nothing more. Meanwhile, the trial of Thomas Davidson began in Philadelphia under intense security and national media attention. It was the trial of the decade, 20 years of secrets unraveling. In a courtroom built for old money and polite corruption, Levi had been subpoenaed again, not just as a witness, but as a representative of a community. A people who had been used, rewritten, erased, and rebuilt by outside hands. He wore the same black coat he'd worn at the burial, the same hat. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. When he took the stand, photographers weren't allowed inside, but sketches of him appeared in papers the next day, always with the same expression, firm, still watching. The prosecutor began with the basics, but quickly moved into the deeper testimony. "Mr. Lapp," she said, "you spent more than 10 years. Trying to find your family?" "Yes." "You petitioned the local police more than a dozen times. It's held services, traveled, met with state officials, dug through basements and archives." "I did." "Why?" Levi didn't hesitate. "Because they mattered. Because they were mine. Because if I didn't look, no one would." She paused. "What would you say to the defendant if given the chance?" Levi turned toward Davidson. The man sat still, looking more like a pale academic than a murderer. Thin fingers, trim beard, hollow eyes, as if truth had eroded him from the inside. "I'd say I hope he sees what he built," Levi said. "I hope he hears the names of every person buried under his stories. And what do you think he would say to you?" Levy met Davidson's eyes, cold, analytical. Watching, he'd say it was necessary. The prosecutor nodded, and was it? Levi said. It was evil dressed in language. "That's all." In the hallway outside the courtroom that afternoon, Levi was approached by a thin man with a briefcase and dark, impassive eyes. He introduced himself as William Trenholm, Department of Homeland Security. "We're launching a national inquiry," he said. "Your case isn't isolated." Davidson was one of 3 major developers tied to similar suppression tactics. Levi stiffened. "How many more families?" Trenholm hesitated, possibly 40. Levi closed his eyes. "How long has DHS known?" "A while," Trenholm admitted. "But this gave us the push we needed." He handed Levi a sealed folder. Inside was a map, points marked across several states, clusters, red dots, familiar. Amish and Mennonite towns. "Some of these aren't confirmed," Trenholm said, "but we believe your testimony could open doors, not just legally, publicly. We need someone who can speak inside the community, someone with credibility." "Nah, not a leader," Levi said. "You are now," Trenholm said, "whether you want to be or not." That night, Levi returned home and stared at the map. Each represented a silence. Each silence, a possible grave. He called Detective Chen. They met at a coffee shop in nearby Burdenhand. Out of sight, away from cameras, she reviewed the folder. Without speaking, then she asked, "Do you know what I've never told you, Levi?" "My mother's family was Old Order Mennonite. She left when she was 16. I never went back. Never wanted to. Too many rules. Too many doors that stayed closed." She looked up at him. "But now, I wonder if those closed doors weren't just cultural. Maybe they were built to keep something out, or someone in." Levi nodded slowly. "We've always trusted silence. Maybe too much." "I'm going to Ohio next," she said. "There's a district outside Berlin that's gone quiet. 2 families who left no forwarding address. 1 home that burned down without investigation. I'll go with you." She didn't argue. 2 days later, they arrived in Holmes County. The district sat in the low hills, tucked behind woods and creek bends, where phone lines thinned and roads narrowed to gravel. The place felt familiar, so much like New Holland, but with a weight pressing down over it. Barns that hadn't been painted. Fields gone to seed. They spoke with the Bishopan older man with a kind voice and fearful eyes. He remembered the missing families, the Reuses and the Planks. "Gone one day," he said. "No warning, no wagons packed. Just gone." The fire. The bishop nodded slowly. That was the Yoder place. A week after the others disappeared, no one injured. But the whole house burned to the foundation. Authorities said it was a faulty stove. "Do you believe that?" Levi asked. Bishop looked at him long and hard. "I stopped believing explanations after your family vanished. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. All three families had received offers from a company called Harvest Solutions, Inc., a rural heritage preservation partner tied, loosely and obliquely, to a now-defunct shell company once. Owned by Michael Greaves. Same template. Different name, different state, but the script never changed. Greaves had left a network behind. Others were still using it, and somewhere, hidden in this new maze of corporations and silence, there was a next. Target, the last pages of his journal, hinted at a final project, a reset. A place where all the fragments would be gathered, where the myth of the resistance would be quietly extinguished. A legacy burial. It had a name, Project Silo. It was already under construction. The entrance to Project Silo wasn't marked on any map. It wasn't listed in county building permits. It didn't appear in land registry documents or on any tax roll. It existed in fragments in the rear appendices of a historical tourism grant, in a bypassed utility extension plan, in an EPA report that referred vaguely to non-disruptive excavation on private heritage development acreage. But it was real. Buried deep in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia, Levi Lapp and Detective Sarah Chen stood at the edge of a wide gravel road that cut through the forest like a surgical scar. Heavy trucks had been through recently roots. In the mud, tire tracks fresh. Ahead of them, just past a clearing, rose a fence, tall, barbed, government gray. Beyond it, a series of low, rectangular buildings with sloped metal roofs and no windows, silent, sterile, inside. The last chapter of a decades-old conspiracy waited, and Levi knew, in his bones, this wasn't just a site, it was a vault, a place built not to preserve history, but to hide it. They entered under federal warrant, supported by a joint task force. That included DOJ, DHS, and the FBI. Chen wore a bulletproof vest. Levi wore none, only his coat, his hat, and the memory of every name they had buried. The buildings were colder than outside. No heating, just long corridors, concrete floors, and locked doors. Some of the rooms contained filing cabinets. Others, banks of servers. One room, larger than the rest, was filled with artifacts. BONETS. Journals, children's, and handwritten. Letters, a massive collection of personal effects. Levi moved through it slowly. Each item tagged, cataloged, confiscated. It was a museum of ghosts. He paused in front of a faded photograph of a young girl holding a lamb. He recognized her instantly, Ruth, his niece. The photo had been taken from their home. It's one of the last images ever captured before the disappearance. Beside it, a file folder with her name. Inside, psychological, profile behavior reports, observational notes, quiet compliant, shows signs of moral rigidity, risk factor moderate. Levi dropped the folder as if it burned. Why would they have this? He whispered. Chen knelt beside another box. Inside were cassette tapes, audio logs. She loaded one into a portable player. Voices crackled. A man's voice confident. Clinical Michael Greaves. Subject Group A resists initial reorientation. Conditioning unsuccessful. However, environmental. Suppression remains viable. Recommendation. Neutralize and preserve key items for future synthesis. Another voice chimed in. Female. Unidentified. Do we extract artifacts before cleanup? Memory must be curated, not deleted. Jen turned off the recorder. They stared at each other. Levi finally spoke. They didn't just destroy, they collected. The final building was different. Windowless, subterranean, cooled by industrial. Ventilation, the vault. It took DHS agents for hours to breach the inner chamber. Inside were refrigerated, rows of sealed containers, numbered, categorized, many unlabeled. But some bore names. Aaron Lapp, Daniel Schultz, Ellis Green, Hannah Reed, Leva's legs. Nearly gave out tissue samples. DNA, blood preserved, stored. Why? Doge scientists whispered an answer Levi would never forget. They were trying to build a predictive model. They wanted to understand which types of resistance spread, which faded. This wasn't just about land, it was social engineering. He was right. In another chamber, they found early-stage training modules, scripts, simulated conflicts between actors, recordings of community-influenced trials, and then a screen, still active, displaying a map of the country, flashing zones, active, dormant, reassessment. At the top of the screen, Silo Index Resistance Forecasting Model V.3.7. Levi turned away and left the room. He didn't speak again till nightfall. The press broke the story 6 days later. It became the biggest national scandal in over 2 decades. Headlines screamed about Operation Silo and the Amish files. Lawmakers demanded resignations. Church groups wept. Activists protested. But the truth had already been absorbed into something else larger, more vague, harder to grasp. Greaves had been dead for 3 weeks, poison in his cell. Davidson had entered a plea deal in exchange for reduced sentencing on tertiary charges. He'd die in prison. Anyway, Brenner disappeared from witness protection. Location, unknown. But Levi didn't care about them anymore. His war was over. He returned to New Holland in time for the first spring planting. He didn't attend the televised hearings. He declined interviews. He spent the early mornings walking Esther to the edge of the field, where she sat in her rocker, staring toward the orchard. Sometimes she would hum the same tune Daisy used to sing. Sometimes she would whisper, "They remember me," and Levi would nod, because she was right. They did. But memory wasn't always a threat. It could be a promise. To one day, months later, Levi received a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo. The picnic again, the one taken just before the family disappeared, but this copy was different. In the background, barely visible in the blur of trees, stood a figure tall, alone, watching. He turned the photo over. There was no message this time, just a stamped marking and faded. Red ink. Archive. Recovered. Restoration underway. Stared at the words for a long time, and then calmly, we burned the photograph. Because some memories didn't belong in museums. Some truths didn't need to be restored. They needed to be buried with prayer and guarded with fire.